Much like Britney Spears, oops, we did it again. After fixing a grand total of 6 Star Wars movies, we turn our attention to The Man of Steel. The Nerd Byword starts now. Welcome back, ladies and gentle nerds, to the Nerd Byword podcast, the only podcast hosted by two nerds who are clearly much nerdier even than the nerd costumes sold at Spirit Halloween. I'm Dave, here with my buddy Kris, and we are ready to deliver a major big talk as we attempt to fix Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. But before we get to that, it's as always time for... That's right, Nerd News. Kris, what's shaking?
Well, it would appear that the final nail in the coffin for Diamond Comics distributors' monopoly in the direct market has at last arrived. IDW is the latest publisher to move away from Diamond, announcing this week an exclusive distribution deal with Penguin Random House that will begin June 1st of next year. The dissolution of the aforementioned monopoly began last year with DC's earth-shattering decision to sever ties with the company. Shortly thereafter, Marvel followed suit. Of the announcement, Diamond president Steve Geppi said, quote, "I would like to thank IDW for their many years of partnership, and we are delighted to continue selling IDW's comics, trades, and graphic novels to our retail customers as a wholesaler effective June 1st, 2022. At Diamond, we understand the unique needs of the direct and book markets and work hard every day to service and support all the stakeholders in our industry, from developing sales tools and launching new services to organizing industry-wide events and engaging with fans on our consumer platforms. Diamond is consistently creating and evolving new and easier ways for publishers, retailers, and fans to connect. I am proud of the role that Diamond plays, and I look forward to our continued service of the direct and book markets," end quote. So what's wild about this to me is, in my personal experience, going to my local comic shop, is how just absolutely frustrated and furious the comic shop owners seem to be over this. After years and years of Diamond having this effective monopoly, and being frustrated with the poor shipping conditions, books simply for no reason being left out of shipping orders, which obviously upsets customers if they're on their poll, or if they're, lining up to get a highly anticipated book, that, moving towards another publisher, I guess change is scary for folks, no matter what, even if it is a seemingly positive one. And then the other thing that just blew my mind was that Diamond really didn't seemingly work towards improving those conditions. They were still falling, victim to the same lapses in shipping conditions. Books were showing up damaged and unsellable, and still leaving stuff out, missing shipments. So it's just really wild, this whole situation of, DC firing the first shot. You would think you'd get your ducks in a row to try and salvage something, but doesn't seem to be the case with Diamond. Dave, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, on the one hand, it is exciting as far as possibilities go. You and I both have been pretty vocal about the fact that a monopoly in distribution is a bad idea for comics. Once we inject a little bit of competition in there, everybody wins: the comic book shops, the consumer. Ultimately, everybody has a better experience and a better situation when people actually have to compete. That being said, I noticed a lot of comic book stuff is now flipping more towards traditional book distributors. And there is a part of me that is concerned that, as more and more publishers shift that way, can this distribution model be supported by, book distribution companies, which are, kind of used to having a significantly longer time to distribute something. I mean, in the small amounts, they might be able to, deal with it, but when pretty much every publisher starts relying on this kind of distribution model, can that hold? And the other concern, of course, is obvious. Are we going to end up shifting basically from one monopoly to another? That's one of the things I think I really appreciated about how DC ultimately broke from Diamond is, the kind of almost like a new, not new company, but a new arm of a company kind of sprung up around that, which I think was a good idea because DC diversified a little bit, having something that a company that handles a little bit more the comic book shop and the floppy part of it, and then a different company handles the trades and stuff. I think that was smart business because ultimately, that's what we're kind of looking for at this point. Multiple companies offering, distribution to multiple publishers, so they have choices and they can go with what suits them best. I would really be troubled if we're just moving from one monopoly in Diamond to a different kind of monopoly with something like, Penguin Random House, for example. So I think cautiously optimistic probably best represents my general attitude about this news story.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. One of the things that kind of goes towards that cautious optimism is I think that these are only like 2-year contracts and 2-year agreements, so you can kind of back out hopefully if things are unsatisfactory. My other growing concern is kind of what you touched on, is that it seems more and more that we are just going towards the trade paperback only kind of market. And there are even some sectors of the fandom that worry that floppies are going to go the way of the dodo, to borrow one of your phrases, and that we are just going to go exclusively towards trade paperbacks. And, we have, companies like Penguin Random House who, focus primarily on trades and, something with a little bit more length than that. That is a bit concerning. At the same time, I don't know that they want to shake things up too much, so it'll be interesting to watch develop. That's just one of my concerns.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think for all its problems, the floppies market is still extremely important. There is a huge market for people who want pieces of the story every week versus just sitting down and reading what is the equivalent of a novel in comic book form, a graphic novel, if you will. So I think getting your story in pieces like that, serialized sort of storytelling week by week, I think there's still a big audience for that, and I hope that doesn't completely fall to the wayside.
Well, speaking of high drama and exciting series that you want to check in on every week, Dave, you have one that I think sent you literally over the moon.
Yeah, I mean, how much better does it get? I've been championing this particular notion of this pitch for a comic series for what seems like the entire length of the existence of this podcast, at least, and that is Batgirls. A series that unites Cassandra Cain, Stephanie Brown, and Barbara Gordon as a team into a single title. Something that literally makes every Batgirl fan happy by giving us a little bit of each of our favorite Batgirls. And here it is, finally announced, launching this December, Batgirls, written by Becky Cloonan and Michael Conrad, and illustrated by Jorge Corona. So I would say this is exactly what the doctor ordered. According to DC solicits for the first issue, Batgirls Cassandra Cain, Stephanie Brown, who are only able to navigate the dark, gritty, and oftentimes scary Gotham City by leaning on each other's friendship. Mentored by Oracle, Barbara Gordon, the Batgirls, move to the other side of town, where Barbara can keep a better eye on them while the hacker Seer is still invading their lives. Steph may be too rash sometimes, and Cass doesn't speak much, but what they lack in similarities they make up for with their mutual respect and love for each other, and what makes them stronger together as Batgirls. This rebellious group of superheroes team up to kick bleep and try to make it as normal teenagers in this pizza slumber party of a series packed with energy, attitude, and friendship. Like, this is what I've been waiting for. I, have talked a lot about how much I love the Stephanie Brown character, uh, particularly how she was written as Batgirl in Brian Q. Miller's series. But I'm also a very big fan of Cassandra Cain, and after the end of her own Batgirl series, which lasted 72, 73 issues, something like that, her character has kind of been rudderless and lost as well. So it seems like such a natural thing to put these characters together. Now, I will say, based on what I've seen so far of the series, there is a certain amount of de-aging going on a little bit here, I think, from where we've seen these characters previously. Cassandra was kind of getting out of her teenage years. Stephanie was, starting to go to college the last time I checked in with her. So they're both teens again. They're both a little younger and a little less experienced. But at the same time, I think this series seems to capture really the essence of each character. Cassandra Cain is the silent but deadly Batgirl, Stephanie Brown, the bright, optimistic Batgirl. And so seeing those two playing off of each other in sort of almost like an 80s buddy cop situation, I think I'm really feeling this one. I'm incredibly optimistic about, the team that is handling the series. All the artwork that has been released for it so far looks absolutely wonderful. Every one of the covers just sings. I think we hit on something here, and DC is finally giving a very large Batgirl fan base exactly what they've been looking for. And let's not forget that in this series, Barbara Gordon will be acting once again more as Oracle than Batgirl, even though we still have the whole miracle cure for her paralysis to live with. The fact that she's kind of resuming that role of mastermind, mentor and hacker, I think that's still the best version of Barbara Gordon that we've had in comics. So, overall, I'm really excited for this, Kris.
Yeah, I am as well. And we got very, very fortunate. I reached out in just I shot my shot, as you might say, in the replies to this initial announcement, trying to garner an interview. And Michael Conrad was very, very kind, and I communicated with him about perhaps lining something up with Becky Cloonan or himself with DC. So hopefully that'll be something on the horizon that we'll be able to nail down. But I'm super excited for this series. I'm telling you what, In Hyuk Lee's cover, I think In Hyuk Lee is quickly becoming like one of my favorite cover artists. This, I think, is a wraparound cover that I'm seeing here. It's just absolutely stunning, just breathtaking. So I'm super excited for this series. I'm based on what I'm seeing here art wise, and you said pizza party, slumber party, or something like that. I'm getting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle vibes. They're playing video games and some of the solicited art. Like it's super fun, team up type of issue. So I'm totally here for this series.
Yeah, and it's just been so long since I've really gotten to enjoy, Stephanie Brown and her best, and seeing her bounce off of, excellent characters like Barbara Gordon and Cassandra Cain. This is just, this is just it, man. This is what I've been waiting for from DC. Don't let me down, DC, and cancel this sucker in 24 issues again. Let's let this one settle and really get a good run in here.
Well, and to, I think, a previous point that you said, one of the biggest, as an outsider, one of the biggest trends on social media, at least Twitter, that I've seen is Cassandra Cain has a huge, rabid following. And so this seems, like you said, like giving everybody what they want. So it seems like a win-win-win-win.
That's exactly right. If they have the right portrayal for these three characters, then we are going to get the Stephanie Brown fans in here. We're going to get the Cassandra Cain fans in here. We're going to get the Barbara Gordon fans in here. This book should sell. I mean, DC could have a really strong hit on their hands here if they do these characters justice. All right, well, that's it for Nerd News, everybody. After a quick break, we're going to be back with the big one. We are going to try to fix Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Stick around. And we're back, ladies and gentle people, and here it comes, the one we have all been waiting for. It's time for And boy, do we have a big talk today. After spending so much time fixing Star Wars movies of both the prequel and sequel variety, we are now actually going to turn our attention towards something a little more comic booky. We are going to try to fix Zack Snyder's 2013 Superman movie, Man of Steel. Man of Steel, of course, famously featured Henry Cavill as Superman Clark Kent, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, Michael Shannon as General Zod, Kevin Costner as Jonathan Kent, ? Diane Lane as Martha Kent, and Russell Crowe as Jor-El. This movie has for many years now had sort of a pretty divisive presence. Many people on social media feel this is the very best portrayal, the only interesting portrayal of Superman, whereas some comic book purists feel that this might be a bit too much of a departure. I'm very interested to see where this discussion brings us. As always, when we try to quote-unquote fix a movie, we start simply by listing 3 things, each of us, that we think are the big problems in the movie and how we would fix them. And I'm so excited, Kris, to hear what your first fix is for the Man of Steel.
Well, my first fix is the biggest issue that I have with the film, and that is the character of Jonathan Kent. I think the character needs a complete and total makeover. So I rewatched this in preparation for this episode, probably for the first time in several years, probably shortly after release. I think I watched it about a year after it came out, and that was probably the last time that I saw it. But it was a big enough issue for me to remember it like it was yesterday. And in rewatching it, it wasn't as egregious as I remembered, but it was still troublesome. So the biggest problems that I have with Jonathan Kent's character is, of course, conceal, don't feel, like just hide your true identity. And even if you stay away from the bigger symbolism, whatever allegories that might be, concealing your true identity and hiding your true self, I think is a terrible message, even with the best of intentions. So at this rewatch, it came across that he wasn't ignorant or hateful or anything like that. It was just, and it's also kind of, unfortunately, it's a lot of what I see. We live in a small town area, a very rural area, and there's a lot of people that, even with the best of intentions, they don't necessarily want people to rock the boat too much. So, and if you want to use this as a metaphor for being multiracial or a person of color, or the one that really struck home to me, the symbolism is or the metaphor of being a member of the LGBTQ community, really just hiding who you are and your true self, because the world around you just can't handle your true identity. So even though he did not come across as overtly hateful, it is still, I think, a terrible message to say, don't show the world who you really, really are, because they can't handle it. Even, I've seen some people say right now, the world's just not ready right now. And so, I have friends and family members who have, been closeted members of the LGBTQ community for years and years, because they have a grandmother who would just die of a heart attack if they were to come out. And I just think that's a terrible message to reinforce, especially the one that the most egregious scene, I think, is after the bus accident. And he said, am I supposed to just let them die? And he says, maybe. And, even in that small town ethos, Midwest USA, being a Midwesterner by birth myself, I just don't think that lines up with what they're going for. I mean, even if you disagree belief wise in something like that, I still think that the Midwestern ethos, the small town America that they're going for, is you have to do the right thing, and you're never going to let anybody come to harm as a result of it. So I just really think that's a really huge misfire that still does not sit well with me. Even though this rewatch overall, I will say, was very enjoyable, more so than I remembered. But this was the big glowing issue to me. And I'm not the biggest Kevin Costner fan. Um, I think that he gets a lot of hoopla because he was in Dances with Wolves or Field of Dreams. Um, so I'm not a huge fan of the casting. Also, I mean, he commits suicide by standing there and getting sucked up by a tornado. I think that's probably the most memorable scene of Jonathan Kent, is just like, no, son, it's okay. I'm just going to die now because the world can't handle you at your truest form. So it's just, it just really rubs me the wrong way.
And I will wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. The Pa Kent character is very ill conceived in this movie. Now, I will say, as a longtime Superman fan and somebody who's read Superman comics pretty much for an eternity now, over 30 years, I always am hesitant when the comic books decide, and they periodically go through this, that Superman as a character would be better off if his parents are dead, a la Batman. And they did this in the New 52 just a few years ago, where Superman's parents both were dead, and he had no sort of lingering connection with Smallville, and that is always a lost opportunity, um, because I think his parents and his upbringing, his adoptive parents specifically, loom incredibly large in why Superman is who he is. And some of the best scenes in some of the very best Superman comics are those where he goes back to Smallville and has some kind of interaction with his adoptive parents. I specifically think of, stuff in like Superman for All Seasons, for example. There are some very, very poignant moments in there when he is racked in with self-doubt, and he returns home to Smallville and spends time with his parents to kind of refocus and find, get his bearings again, in essence. And you can never quite see Superman do that with these parents. Not just Jonathan Kent now in particular, but both Kents in general have a very odd portrayal. There's stuff like Martha Kent saying, "You don't owe this world a darn thing," and it's just like, it's very dismissive of what he is trying to do or be, or the path he is trying to find as this this do-gooder, if you will. So Pa Kent here really always has chafed me in a lot of ways, because he's not really guiding Clark towards becoming Superman. He seems to be, if anything, a roadblock in his hero's journey. But on top of that, I think there's something incredibly ill-conceived about his death scene, beyond all the memes and jokes we can make about Tornado Daddy. And that is that if you go ahead and you take that moment, it was completely unnecessary. Clark does not learn a lesson from this death because he could have saved his father. Whereas if we, and I know I'm going to get flack from some listeners that I'm going to go ahead and quote the Superman the movie with Chris Reeve. It's too old. It's too old fashioned. Blah blah blah. Yada yada yada. I really don't care. The lesson learned here matters. So in Superman the movie with Chris Reeve, when Pa Kent dies, it is from a heart attack. It is something that is outside of Clark's control. And so what does he learn from this? Well, he literally gives voice to that when he stands at his father's grave. He says, all this power, and I couldn't save him. And that is a lesson that Superman has to learn time and time again in the comics, that no matter how hard he tries, he cannot, in fact, save everybody. There are things that are outside of his control, despite what the naysayers when it comes to Superman may think. He is, in fact, not all powerful. And So this is not a lesson he is learning here in any way, shape, or form. What he is learning instead is some people are not going to want to be saved. You better not save them, otherwise they might sue you or something for like wrongful life saving. Like, it's just the whole message of the moment is completely in opposition to the journey Clark is on in trying to find his way toward becoming Superman. And more than, all the memes and all the jokes we can make about that, it's just very, very ill conceived overall. The character and the death scene in particular.
And you bring up some interesting points, two of which I want to touch on again. First and foremost, this really creates like an unnecessary Uncle Ben moment for him. Like, one of the most formative moments and the biggest sources of guilt for Peter Parker is that he could have saved his Uncle Ben if he would have done the right thing, but it was like an unconscious decision. Clark is sitting there and forced to watch his father be sucked up in a twister, and it's an absolutely conscious decision. So now he is willingly racking his son with guilt. For what reason? Because the world just can't handle it, and it's just wild to me. And the other point that I wanted to touch on is you said, New 52 and other iterations completely remove the Smallville from his character. And I think that's a huge mistake, even with my lack of experience reading wise, because I think that grounding in Smallville, and sometimes they go over the top and it's cheesy and it's token and it's goofy. But I think the duality of that character and being both Kryptonian and both a Kent from Smallville, I think that adds a layer of complexity that keeps him from being this overpowered alien. And so one of the greatest criticisms that we always see of Superman is he's too OP, or he's too this or too that, and he's not nuanced enough. But that's one of the things that brings nuance to the character. And so removing that, even with my lack of experience, with the readership of the character, I can see that.
As you always see a lot of arguments in think pieces online and the like, and we've even seen this represented in several, sort of Elseworld comics like Injustice, that it is Lois that somehow grounds him, and if anything were ever to happen to Lois, he would obviously turn evil because he loses his tether to humanity, which is a bunch of baloney, because this guy's been running around for 30 plus years on planet Earth before, he gets with Lois. His upbringing is his tether to humanity. Smallville is his tether to humanity. And his parents, to some extent are his tether to humanity. And so I think they are one of the most important parts of the Superman mythos. They have to be gotten right, and they have to play this very particular role in his journey to becoming Superman for it all to click into place and for it to all work. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, his parents are extremely important, and I don't think they quite click here in this movie. We don't need to go kindly old couple like Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman back in the 90s necessarily. But even if you look at a portrayal like John Schneider in Smallville, for example, here's a dad who didn't always get it right, who did steer his son wrong on occasion, but he also grew and learned, and ultimately, played a role in shaping this young man and his need for helping others. And if Smallville has a better portrayal of a character than a major motion picture about Superman, you have to stop and pause and think, where did we go wrong in this particular moment, Chris?
And even in the few episodes of Superman and Lois, I've seen has a better portrayal of it too. All right, you said the magic words, Lois Lane. What's your first big fix?
God, I just feel so bad for Amy Adams because I'm a huge Amy Adams fan. There is an energy about her that is absolutely mesmerizing. I remember the very first time I saw a performance from Amy Adams was in the Disney movie Enchanted, where she literally plays like an animated Disney princess that sort of gets catapulted into the real world, and she's like trying to apply Disney cartoon logic to the real world. Like she's trying to sing songs to the pigeons in Central Park and stuff like that. And there is such an energy about her in that role that absolutely captivated me. And then across all the Zack Snyder movies that featured Lois Lane as a character, you don't get that Amy Adams energy in any way, shape, or form. And that is a shame, because Lois Lane as a character is spunky, is witty, is hard nosed. You know, talking about some of the other Loises, the first Lois Lane that I encountered in live action was Margot Kidder's Lois. You know, chain smoking, can't spell worth a lick, but incredibly intelligent, a great nose for a story, will do about anything to get the story, and figures out Clark as Superman completely by herself. And then we have, Terry Hatcher. I know that Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman has become the show that dare not be named because of, Dean Cain's recent comments on social media and blah, blah, blah. But I will die on the hill that Terry Hatcher is one of the all-time classic Lois Lanes. She gets so much right about this character in her performance, even though there's some very 90s stuff in this show that feels a little wrong by modern standards. And even Erica Durance on Smallville immediately captures that go-getter attitude, that never say die, that spunk, that wit, the fact that she can stand there and tease Clark about all sorts of stuff, nicknames him Smallville and all that stuff. I mean, that's Lois Lane. And in this particular movie, although at least in Man of Steel she has some agency, the spunk, the wit, is completely missing from this character. It's like she's a cobra that has been defanged or something. It's like she's this docile, lady reporter, rather than this in your face force of nature almost. And that really is something that needs to be fixed. And I'm not saying Amy Adams is at fault here. She was more than capable, based on her past performances, to play that kind of Lois. It's just that in the writing, that Lois did not exist on the page. And anything that diminishes an icon like Lois Lane and makes her less than she is in her very best incarnations just doesn't have room in a movie like this. Like, it is probably, in my opinion, the most singularly wrong-headed writing of Lois Lane that I have probably seen. And a lot of TV shows have, made mistakes as, they went on. I mean, even Terry Hatcher's portrayal, when that show started getting a little bonkers in season 3 and 4, there were some wrong-headed things that they did even with Lois, but there was a core truth to the character, and that core truth just doesn't at all exist in Man of Steel. So ultimately, to me, Lois Lane has always loomed large in my life. She has always been this incredibly powerful woman that I admired, even when I was a young boy. She was, an equal to Superman, if not in powers, then certainly in every other way. And that kind of woman should not be diminished on the big screen, Chris.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of my overarching criticisms of the Snyderverse at large, is that the women, the female characters, lack so much agency. Even when Diana shows up in a Snyder-directed film, she plays second fiddle immediately and scales back to the men in the film. So. And Lois, I think you nailed it with like a defanged cobra here, because it was not as egregious as Zack Snyder's Justice League, where she literally was not allowed to speak because she was in such terrible mourning. It's crazy because, like, I thought that I was getting the notions of that type of character where, she's on location in the Arctic and doing all these things, but then it's almost like she's this catalyst, like she's this piece of flint that starts the action, but then immediately is rendered useless because of the male characters. And I think even I almost put this as one of my big fixes, but I figured we could tie it in here, is there really is no agency for any of the female characters in this film, with the exception of Zod's lieutenant, whose name is escaping me. She was awesome. But, Yeah, so she starts this action, she goes on location and stuff, but then as soon as the stuff starts to kick off, she immediately is rendered into this damsel in distress. She can't breathe. She needs to be rescued immediately. So it's a bit unfortunate. And, once I started reading Superman comics, I immediately identified with the character and admired the character because I got super Mary Jane Watson vibes. So, like, and I'm always fascinated by those types of characters, the non-powered significant others or family members of a superhero's life that are just as compelling because their personality is so strong. So I think it's a real big swing and a miss here.
Yeah, Lois Lane is at her best steak and potatoes, and in this movie she's more like soggy bread, and that's a shame. All right, Chris, second fix for the Man of Steel. What have you got?
So the structure and the pacing of this is like a fever dream. I get what they were trying to go for. They were trying to go to this like kind of noir flashback type of thing, but I just don't think it worked. And they leaned into it so hard that when you actually lay it out like on a timeline, everything happens so quickly. Like Clark gets his suit and then immediately is hurled into battle. He hasn't really had any time to do anything. And then it's just breakneck action, 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 cross, boom. I think this film is probably best served as two separate films. Like there's two movies in here. I feel like they're like, and maybe they don't want to do a full on origin story, and maybe that's the lack of commitment that kind of bogs this down. But it feels like there's an origin story, and then there's the Zod overarching conflict, which maybe you could have teased enough in a first film and then led into the second one. But as a result, it's a head spinning hurrah adventure. So I felt a little bit disoriented with that. I think some of the flashbacks were they added some depth of character and it was nice, but it was a little bit disorienting, the pacing and the structure of the plot.
It's funny that you said structure because structurally I have so much to say about this movie. So first, to comment on what you said, I absolutely adore the fact that you said maybe there's two movies here. Maybe Zod shouldn't show up till the second one. OMG. Doesn't that sound a little bit like Superman the movie and Superman 2? You have the origin story that hints at Zod, and then he shows up in the second one on Earth, and you have this awesome sequel. Oh, maybe they knew what they were doing back then. In a lot of ways, this movie, particularly the third act of this movie, is a response to Superman Returns. So Superman Returns came out and was immediately embasted and criticized because it was sort of stuck in this Chris Reeves, Richard Donner loop. And everything was like very much like Superman the movie. Everything that Superman was doing was more like feats of strength, like saving an airplane, lifting a landmass, but he didn't have an enemy that he could punch. And so everybody was like, well, Superman Returns was a little boring. There was no action. And then in Man of Steel, they just decided to go, you know what, our third act is just going to be wall-to-wall action. Like, we're just going to do nothing but action nonstop. Everybody's just going to beat the snot out of each other. Which is way too reactionary and doesn't serve the movie very well. It doesn't really have any chance to breathe in that third act. But here's, I think, where the movie went wrong structurally. This movie is Batman Begins. That's literally the structure it hews to. We have, the main character with a beard wandering around, trying to find his way. We get in the first half, we get peppered in flashbacks to his youth and how his youth has shaped him. Then we hit about the halfway point, and this is where the main character puts on the suit for the first time, and we get the main conflict. Structurally, they try to remake Batman Begins with Superman. And on the one hand, I can't entirely blame them for this. It was extremely successful with Batman. On the other hand, there are, and we can talk about this ad nauseum, there are essential differences between the two characters. They are not the same, that you can't treat them exactly the same, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. You know what the problem is with the first half of this movie? In the first half of Batman Begins, you have a Bruce Wayne who has already decided, kinda, what he wants to do. He's a man on a mission. He's trying to find the tools, basically, to take on his mission. He's training. He's looking for, the League of Shadows to try to train with them and get their skills. He is moving through the first half of the movie with purpose. What we have with Clark Kent in the first half of this movie is that he is moving through the movie in a similar fashion, but without purpose. He doesn't know what he is. He doesn't know what he wants to do. He has not find his direction yet. And watching a character aimlessly wander from frame to frame and from scene to scene in a movie is incredibly dull and boring because you do not have the promise of where this is going. You are not watching a character growing and moving forward purposefully. You're seeing a character just kind of meander about. And that's why the Batman Begins structure that they very, very clearly applied in this movie simply does not work in this movie. Because Clark, in his wanderings, does not have a clear goal set for him. So there is no forward momentum in the narrative for the first half of the movie. And then the second half of the movie basically devolves into, how much of Metropolis can we destroy? So that there is no clear arc for the character from point A to point B, at least the way I see it. What are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, so we have essentially just moved straight into your second point because ours are essentially intertwined. But another thing that I will add to this is this movie came in response to the popularity of Chris Nolan's Dark Knight franchise, his trilogy. And so I guess it was a thing at Warner or Snyder or whoever's idea it was. It was just like, let's take this gritty, grounded thing that works so well for Batman, who is, at his core, a gritty and grounded character, and just apply it to Superman, our other big name character. And sure, that'll be work. Oh, wait, we're totally forgetting that they are, at their core, essentially different. So I think that's what suffers from it as well. It's just like, I don't understand, and I don't want to be like a Marvel over DC guy here, but I think that's one of the biggest missteps in the DCEU is that they have failed to understand the core differences of those characters and then work with it. Because this is Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. Like, that whole conflict of, and we could, I could go way off into Batman versus Superman. Like, that should have been the central part of that conflict, is their ideologies are completely conflicting. And you're missing out on that when you try to just copy and paste this Instagram filter from one character to another. It doesn't fit.
That is exactly right. And my main criticism of Batman v Superman as well is that Superman at no point in that movie feels like Superman. He feels like Batman if he had, superpowers. The ideological differences are not represented. So yeah, I think the fix here is number one, don't try to imitate the structure of Batman Begins because Superman is not Batman. And two, understand that Superman at his core is a very different character from Batman, and you need to play to Superman's strengths. Otherwise, you get the Man of Steel is the problem.
Well, and I think that's why it's so fascinating with both pairs of characters is when they do come together in films like in things like Avengers or in Morrison's JLA. Despite their differences, the fact that they can cohesively work as a unit, put aside their differences for the greater good, that's what makes good storytelling.
That's exactly right. But here there are very few differences, it seems like. All right, Chris, that actually brings us to your third and final big fix for the Man of Steel. What have you got?
All right, even more than Pa Kent, this might be the most meme-worthy moment of the movie and one of the most just unsettling moments. And I'm, of course, talking about the snap. Not Thanos, I'm talking about snapping Zod's neck and murdering him. Because that's the only way to save the dumb tourist white people that are just standing there when they could easily just run away, but they are standing frozen in fear. And so Superman is, of course, left with no other decision than to just snap his neck. So this is, even with my remedial knowledge of Superman, this seems very out of character for him based on what I know of the character. Peter Parker's along in the same lines, not the not take a life crew. So it's just obviously just so problematic and troublesome, especially now that I'm rewatching it with fresh eyes. And Jesus Weezus, people just run away. They're literally standing there. There's nothing blocking them into that area. They're not cornered off. They're standing in the middle of a wall. Please just run away. So, the whole scene is just a huge, huge problem. And then he lets out this soul-wrenching scream. That whole scene I could have just done without.
And the problem is, this is the beginning of Superman's journey. So everybody looks at Superman and sees, oh, here's this guy who's just gonna he's all powerful, and everybody's nervous about this guy to begin with, and he's just gonna run around and snap people's necks every time they're in danger. But much has been said on both sides of the debate of whether Superman should kill. Has he killed in the comics before? Yes. In sort of main continuity stories, not just Injustice, where he becomes like a crazy overlord. Yes. In fact, John Byrne very famously had him kill off his version of Zod after his reboot, and then lived with that guilt for the remainder of basically that part of the continuity until they, reboot it again, because that's what DC does. But to me, the person who actually captured Superman and the idea of murder or killing in general best is Alan Moore in one of the all-time greatest Superman stories, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, which is sort of billed as the last Superman story before the big reboot came after Crisis of Infinite Earths. And, there's a lot that happens in the story, and it escalates, tremendously. But basically, the main villain here that it all leads to is this interdimensional imp, Mxyzptlk, who goes, very, very dangerous in this particular story. And in the end, the only way Superman sees that he can end this, almost all-powerful being's menace is to kill him. And immediately Superman is racked with guilt, even though Lois says, hey, look, you did this in self-defense, you had to do what you had to do, but Superman does not see it that way. And in very famously in the end of the story, he says, nobody has the right to kill. Not Mxyzptlk, not you, not Superman, especially not Superman. And then, you have this narration from, I believe, Lois, and she says, he turned and walked away in complete silence. I ran after him, calling his name, and he didn't reply. And by the time I realized where he was heading, it was too late. And so he's heading into a room filled with gold kryptonite. And as he walked into the blinding golden light, he turned and looked back over his shoulder. He smiled at me, and I never saw Superman again. The idea of Superman killing is not the beginning of Superman's career. It is the place where Superman ends. Because as soon as this character kills, it's really not Superman anymore. At least that seems to be the implication of one of the all-time greatest comic book writers, Alan Moore, even though, we can argue how nutty Alan Moore is these days, but his writing is particularly on Superman is tremendous, and Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow is a tremendous story. And so the idea that Superman's end point is killing makes sense to me, because Superman is in a lot of ways much like Batman, a symbol, right? We get a lot in Batman Begins of how Batman is a symbol, he stands for this, he stands for that. Well, so is Superman. And if you start having Superman snapping necks, then that symbol is diminished. It's really what it comes down to. And to Alan Moore, when Superman reaches the point where he kills, he's not Superman anymore. And Superman himself in the story acknowledges that. It also makes me extremely sad that Superman lore has such a very easy fix for this in the notion of the Phantom Zone. How many stories have we read where Superman ultimately, defeats Zod or any other rampaging Kryptonian with Phantom Zone technology? This idea of, hey, this is what Kryptonians used for a prison, and I can lock, Zod away in the Phantom Zone. And then we even might be able to have, Michael Shannon pop up and reprise his role in some way, shape, or form later down the line. Wouldn't that have been interesting? Because let's be honest, Michael Shannon's performance as Zod was quite good. I don't think he's ever found any scenery that he didn't want to chew. So, this killing thing is just a major problem for the movie. And again, has Superman never killed? Well, certainly not. There have been times where he is killed in the comics. But usually when they go to those moments is either A, some kind of Elseworld story, free from continuity and the notion that this is somehow the Superman, or B, they're trying to make a really big, important point about the character, as in Alan Moore's case, where it's just like, you know what? Superman just killed, and even he knows he should not have done that. He doesn't have the right to take a life. And before anybody says this, and I have to jump in and say this too really quickly, Chris, there is the ongoing story that people like to point to, that Superman 2, the Chris Reeve movie, that there too, Zod and the other Kryptonian criminals died. Because they basically tried to fly off and jump in stuff in the Fortress of Solitude and went down cliffs, and they're dead. Now, very famously, directors changed. A huge chunk of Superman 2 was filmed by Richard Donner during production of the first Superman, and then the producers basically fired Donner, brought on a different director to finish the movie. So I think it bears remembering that there is, in fact, a scene filmed by Donner, which sees the Zod and his ilk actually arrested and being walked out of the Fortress of Solitude by police. Now, how police got up there to the Fortress of Solitude, I do not know. But I do know that the original intention of those scenes were very clearly that Superman did not kill them. He depowered them, and then they could be arrested, and they could be locked up like regular criminals. Anyways, end rant, Chris.
It's also like the fact that he bears this restraint from killing. I think that adds, more nuance to the character, to lean on a previous point that we made. Of course, it's easy for this overpowered character to just snap a neck, and that's the easy way out. What makes him a compelling character is the restraint and holding back. So I think just giving him the easy way out of just snapping a neck, like I think that's just a kind of a cheat.
And I've seen, the argument repeatedly that, this is the moment where he learns that he should never kill again. Like, dude, I have never killed anybody. I don't need to kill somebody to learn the lesson that murder is wrong. Can we maybe just, dispel that myth? We don't all have to run around and have, that one guy or lady that we kill just so we learn the lesson that murder is wrong. That's baloney.
All right, here we are. Probably the biggest point for you. What is your third and final point?
Superman says in this movie very famously that the S on his chest stands for hope, but the movie doesn't give me a lot. And that's really the biggest problem I have with The Man of Steel. It feels overall so joyless. And a Superman movie, should have these moments of light, of joy, of goodness, and they're not really there. There is one scene where it kind of almost finds that moment, and that is when Superman flies for the first time. And he's flying along, and there's this smile just spreads across his face, and in that moment, I believe it. In that moment, I believe that this Superman can be the Superman. And then that moment passes, and we never revisit that kind of feeling, that sensation again. And that is such a shame. And really, when you look at Superman, all of this stuff gets boiled down so well by so many really good comic book writers. I think, for example, of, the finale of All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison. Now, there is a human being who gets it. Lex Luthor kind of steals Superman's power for himself. And then he starts seeing the world as Superman, and he realizes, oh my gosh, I've been wasting my life, and he basically becomes a good guy right then and there, just because he was able to see the world through Superman's eyes. I don't think this Superman would have that effect on a Lex Luthor character. The joy of his powers and the joy of helping others and being there for people is just not there. And a part of that sure is the color palette. I mean, this is a very muted movie. There's not a lot of bright colors, even in Superman's suit. But it goes beyond color grading. This when I'm talking about light and brightness, I'm not necessarily talking about colors. I'm talking about Superman's character, how he carries himself, how he interacts with people. It's just lacking. And I'm not saying this is because Henry Cavill isn't capable of that. I think Henry Cavill is a geniusly cast actor in the role of Superman. And I'm going to go ahead and take it a step further. I think the cast of this movie in general is really, really good. I think it's really the writing that fails these characters here. And if we could inject some optimism, some hope, and some of that Superman goodness into this movie, I think a lot of, diehard comic book Superman fans like myself would feel very, very different about this movie, because there's a lot to like here. And so, we talk a lot about the stuff that needs to be fixed. There's a lot of good stuff here too. The movie looks pretty darn good. It's very competently directed. In fact, I've noticed, but just rewatching it, that Snyder has admirable restraint in this movie when it comes to slow motion. Like
Yes.
there's hardly any of that trademark slow motion action scene stuff here.
The
He very
only memorable one that stood out in my mind is when he has his fist on the snow and like that part.
Yeah, which shockingly actually worked in that moment really well. Which is one of those things. Any movie making technique can be incredibly effective if used in moderation. So I think Snyder's direction overall is not bad. And the acting is solid and the casting is great. I think what we have here is a failure to understand Superman as a character. And if you just get a little bit of that comic book Superman's optimism, hope, and joy, this would be a very, very different movie, Chris.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is just like an overreaction to like Superman, like the tradition. So like a lot of fans say that, I want him to be more quote unquote interesting or be this or be that. And so I think it's an overreaction and trying to, like I said before, put a filter on the character that just completely loses the essence of the character. I always draw comparisons to Superman and Captain America. They're the two kind of staunch, do the right thing type of characters. And not without their warts or whatever, but like I think, like for example, for me, it's when you walk away from watching this movie, how does it make you feel? And this film, while I enjoyed my viewing experience this time around, did not have me walking away feeling good, hopeful, optimistic. It just felt like, well, there's some dark mess in this world and stuff gets messed up all the time. And thankfully, this time we had somebody to help save us from complete destruction. I wasn't left with this overarching theme of optimism and sentiment. But in contrast, you have something like Captain America: The First Avenger, which is not a perfect film. It's a little bit cheesy and quirky, but I mean, good God, it's Captain America. It's stuck in the 1940s or set in the 1940s, and that's what they're going for. But like, all I need from watching the First Avenger is that moment where he dives on the grenade, and that is everything to me. That one moment, and I think with just one moment like that or two, that would be enough to carry this film and to bring you to the point where, like, you know what, it's going to be okay. And I think if you had one or two scenes like that in this film, you could have achieved a similar sentiment walking away from it.
I can agree with that. We talked a lot about the snap and Superman killing Zod because Zod is threatening these people, and he said he's going to keep killing, blah blah blah. In most versions of a scene like that, when the villain decides to turn on the civilians as a way of getting to Superman, it's because Superman has shown this deep love and concern for people. He'll stop what he's doing and try to save people. Even, again, going back to the old ones, Chris Reeve's Superman 2, they're like, the Kryptonian villains discover that he's trying to save people and then use that against him. But in this movie, I never got that sense that Zod was like, hey, Superman really likes people, so I need to use that against him, because, in that entire scene, it never felt like he was making an effort to try to save people. And there was something that felt so icky about the ending when half of Metropolis looks like it's been leveled and Superman is standing there making out with Lois Lane. I'm like, that's a little tone deaf, Superman. Like, I'm glad you found your lady there, but you and Zod just leveled half the city. God knows how many people died. And I didn't see you trying to, catch any of them falling out of a building that's crumbling or something. So I think that's probably part of it. And I'm not saying that other portrayals of Superman haven't had property damage and that people could have not, died in some of these conflicts. But there was always an effort made, I think, in those portrayals to show that Superman will attempt to save as many as he can, even when he realizes he can't save everybody. And here, I don't think we got that sense. And that's a part that's missing. And again, people say this is a young Superman. He's just starting out. He doesn't know what he's doing. That's all fine and dandy. But who you are at that point in your life, I think
he's 33. That's not super young.
Yeah, that's shaped pretty well. If your first instinct is I'm going to save people, then that is going to be your first instinct regardless of level of experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think I almost put this as one of my big fixes, is the scene where he rescues his mother after she's put in a cane chokehold. And he just completely tears through them. At first, it's like, oh, it's cool. He's going to save his mom. Like, don't talk to my mom like that, jabroni. But he completely tears through, like, the silos and all this farm equipment, completely levels large swaths of the neighborhood. And
I hope all these farmers have really good insurance.
Right. And so, like, it just seems like he's so reckless. And I think if he would have, used a little bit of caution there, then the moment with saving the civilians would have landed a little bit better. But much throughout, like, the Zod fight in the third act of the film, it's so reckless. And there's absolutely no, like, consciousness of the damage that's being done and the lives that are unnecessarily being endangered because you want to take out IHOP and Sears, the not so subtly placed product placements. Rest in peace, Sears.
Yeah, can we just also point out that as a if we had a lightning round, the first lightning round fix would be dial back on the product placement. It is so blatant in this movie. Like, I know every movie has it; it's part of the game we all played.
Right.
But I mean, it was almost as bad as the last Power Rangers movie, where literally, what was it? What was it? IHOP, or was it a donut shop or something? Like, it actually played a role in the plot. Like, you have to go to this donut shop to find this MacGuffin or something. Like, it was almost there. It was so in your face. Just a little bit less would have made it feel a little more real.
And geez Louise, that redheaded kid that's now the manager at IHOP, how central is this figure that he just happens to be in every place?
Well, I think, was that supposed to be Pete Ross? Because
I think so.
In the comic books, Pete Ross is a ginger, and he is I think he's a ginger, and it's him and Lana Lang and Clark are like sort of these three really close friends. So maybe that was some kind of attempt to harken back to, like, the comic books and his youth and everything, but a little misguided, perhaps, that he just keeps popping up everywhere. Not as misguided as ultimately Zack Snyder's take on Jimmy Olsen turned out to be, but fairly misguided, let's say that. Chris, any final thoughts on the Man of Steel?
Henry Cavill is impeccable, and he's perfectly cast, and he did absolutely nothing wrong.
You know what? I totally agree. And I said this earlier. I think the cast in general is just fantastic cast. Like whoever did the casting on this movie did their job right. These are great actors for these roles overall. Um, with the minor misstep here and there, but I think overall this is a really, really fantastic cast. And so it's just a shame that the writing kind of let them down, at least in this nerd's opinion.
I'm getting mad vibes of the next film franchise I want to fix, The Amazing Spider-Man. Andrew Garfield and Henry Cavill, perfectly cast, perfectly acted superhero characters, and they were let down by the writing and the direction around them.
You know what? I would love doing that. That sounds like a lot of fun. All right, well, that is it for our Byword Big Talk. Stick around after this final break for everybody's favorite Nerd Byword segment, Nerd Commendations. And we're back, and it's time for... Kris, what are you commending to our nerd following this week?
So, several years ago, I was a bit strapped for cash, so I could not afford to play a lot of console video games, but my gamer heart just would not be quiet. So I played a lot of mobile games, free-to-play mobile games. My absolute favorite, and I know our loyal listener, Lex Pendragon, knows all about this, Avengers Alliance, the Facebook game. Like, that was basically the only reason I was on Facebook. Avengers Alliance, rest in peace. Love that game so much. I miss it so much. And there have been a lot of Marvel free-to-play games that have come and gone since then that really never scratched that itch for me. I've since been able to dive back into console gaming, but I got a new one that has finally scratched that itch after all these years, and that is Marvel Future Revolution. It's Marvel's first open world mobile game, free roam PPR, multiverse converging story. The official synopsis says, quote, Marvel Future Revolution begins when numerous Earths converge in the multiverse to form an entirely new primary Earth filled with unique zones and missions to explore, such as high-tech New Stark City, the dangerous Hydra Empire, the wild and rugged Sakaar, and many more. As agents of the newly formed Omega Flight superhero team, players will work together to battle an onslaught of supervillains and defend the primary Earth from a never-ending series of threats, end quote. And so you have about 6 or 7 characters that you can choose from. You pick 5 to build out your roster. I think you can buy additional roster spots with resources later on, but my current roster, I'm rolling with Spider-Man and Storm, Captain America, Doctor Strange. I think you can also choose from Iron Man, Star-Lord, Captain Marvel. And so this is just a really fun game. I don't have necessarily... One of the things that kind of made me move away from freemium games like that, free-to-play mobile games, is you have to log in every day and do all these necessary things, make all the checklists. And this one, you can kind of pick up and play at your own pace, your own leisure. You probably want to log in at least once a day to get your login rewards and stuff, but it's not as time-consuming. You can kind of play at your own pace. More so than other ones. So Marvel Future Revolution, it's really an extensive campaign, and you know me, I love a good campaign. So like the storyline, some of the side missions are absolutely goofy. You walk from one person, talk to them, walk 2 feet away to talk to another person, and then boom, that's the side mission. But I mean, I'm not gonna complain that much with a free game like that. But the main storyline is really, really interesting. The graphics are out of this world, better than some console games. So it does take a while to download it first, so you probably want to have your phone or your iPad on the charger while you're downloading the initial patch. But this is a really, really fun game. The mechanics, the fighting style, it's really, really fun. So I highly recommend Marvel Future Revolution.
Geez, Chris, you're making life hard on me here. I'm going to have to start facing some of my preconceived notions. I have to say, as a lifelong console gamer, mobile gaming has never particularly appealed to me. Now, my wife will swear by it. She loves playing games on her phone, but there is something about so many mobile games, when I tried them at least, that felt so icky. Like they're all just trying to squeeze as much money out of me as possible,
Yes.
you know? And so I've always kind of shied away from mobile games because I just don't want to be harassed every 5 minutes for money, or be put on some kind of waiting thing like you can play again in 2 hours unless you pay for this. I don't want that. It makes me feel icky. I want to be able to just play my game, and I'm more than willing to pay up front if you just leave me alone when I'm actually playing the game. So here's my question: Marvel Future Revolution, does it let me just play the game, or does it harass me for cash?
Yeah, so like it will have like those pop-up ads like, hey, do you want this costume? Do you want this costume? The biggest thing is costumes, which for the most part what I've seen is only a cosmetic thing, a la Fortnite. So my kids always frustrate me because they're like, I need this new skin, which is an uncomfortable term to begin with.
Ugh.
So it's just like a cosmetic type thing. So you could just click out of those ads. But the one that I wholeheartedly agree is like you can't play unless you like wait for your energy to recharge. That is not an issue in this game. You could just play and play and play and play and play.
All right, well then I might have to just give this one a shot.
All right, so I did some homework for your nerd commendation this week, Dave, because I saw that the show was coming out. So what do you got for us?
Yeah, so the show is coming out. So what better time to talk about Why the Last Man, the comic book? One of the great seminal books to come out of my all-time favorite imprint at DC Comics, Vertigo. Oh, Vertigo, how I miss you. Vertigo, come back, please. Where have you gone? We miss you so. We just need some Vertigo back in our lives. So, Why the Last Man is a post-apocalyptic science fiction comic book written by Brian K. Vaughan with art by Pia Guerra. It was published at Vertigo from 2000 through 2008. And I have the pleasure of having the entire series in trade paperbacks. I was a late comer to this series and didn't actually collect it in single issues. And the series centers on Yorick Brown and his pet capuchin monkey Ampersand, who are the only biological males who survive a plague that targets the Y chromosome. Now, this series in some ways is early 2000s, and some allowances have to be made for that. But if you're willing to make those allowances, it is probably one of the best books to be produced at Vertigo in the early 2000s. It is absolutely fantastic, and much of it still holds up tremendously. I can't really speak to the television adaptation at this point. I know there's 3 episodes out. I haven't had a chance to actually watch any of it, but I find the comic book series holds up wonderfully, and I could just read it till the cows come home. There is a lot here about gender roles, gender identity, again, through the filter of the early 2000s, and things, in some ways, thankfully, have certainly changed since the early 2000s in that regard. But at the same time, there's still a lot here to love as far as its commentary on men, on women, on preconceived notions of gender and gender identity and gender roles. At the same time, it's also just a really, really good story of this guy trying to basically cross the United States in a sort of a post-apocalyptic, everything went to crapscape because half of the population is gone, just trying to get to his girlfriend. And so there is a lot to love here. The art by Pia Guerra is absolutely fantastic and holds up throughout. I love so much about this book in the characters and how they are portrayed, particularly Agent 355, who ultimately is supposed to be protecting Yorick as the last biological male around. She is one of my all-time favorite comic book characters, period, probably ever. And so just seeing this journey is fantastic, and I'm so glad that they're adapting it. I really hope the television series does the comic justice while maybe fixing some of the more problematic things, in it through a more modern lens. But I will reread this book frequently. I still think the bulk of it totally holds up, Chris.
Yeah, so I read the first 3 issues on DC Universe Infinite, and that was my first immediate takeaway. I was like, "Oh man, this is very much of its time." So some of the dialogue is a little bit cringy, a little bit unfortunate, but I also was happy to see that in the credits that Pia Guerra is listed as like the co-creator. I love when they do that in comics, of like the writer and the artist as being listed as like storytellers. Like I just love that, because they're equal parts of the story. So I felt a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of Brian K. Vaughan, a man, writing this female centric thing and like this social commentary thing. But then when they started listing Pia Guerra as like the storyteller, I was like, well, maybe it was a collaborative thing. And then some of those things started to iron out over as the issues went on. But I'm definitely intrigued to keep reading this. It's very, very fun. It feels like a video game. Like I feel like I've played this video game, or I want to play this video game. And then I'm also super stoked to start checking out the series. I haven't hit play yet. Hulu, I always forget about Hulu. I do this bundle and I always forget about Hulu. But I've got to get caught up on What We Do in the Shadows as well over there. One of the greatest television shows ever.
And I think it's actually fair to question a little bit, Brian K. Vaughan as a man writing this female-centric book. I also think, though, that part of why it works is because the main character is a male then stuck in this female-centric world and is trying to, figure out how to navigate that. And so I think Brian K. Vaughan's viewpoint works best in those scenes, focused, squarely on York. And I think Pia Guerra had probably a really strong influence on many of the scenes that primarily focus on women, because much of it rings fairly true, even though I may not be the best judge of that. But as somebody who, as I've mentioned on this podcast before, has, been surrounded by strong women his whole life, and women have sort of, loomed large in my upbringing in pretty much every way, shape, or form. There is a lot to love about the series. Not perfect by modern standards, but I think overall I can forgive it its early 2000s-ness.
Yeah, I think one of the things that kind of helps it work a little bit is that Yorick is such a bumbling idiot. So you can kind of forgive some of the cringiness of that character in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, folks, that is it for this week's episode of the Nerd Byword podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for another adventure in the nerd world. If you liked what you heard today, please be sure to get on your favorite podcast platform, give us a rating and or review, and subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. We are available wherever podcasts can be found, including our very own website, nerdbyword.com.
Be sure to also hit us up on social media. You can find us, our show page on Twitter and Instagram at NerdByWord, or individually at ThatNerdChris or ThatNerdDave on those same platforms. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.